our two-part weekend Q&A. We went an hour yesterday talking about social science stuff, history, philosophy, politics, things like that. We're going to be going again, doing that for another hour today between 3:30 and 4:30 Pacific time, 6:30, 7:30 Eastern time, and I believe in England, in London, 11:30 to 12:30 midnight. And we've had some amazing people come in from all over the world. We had people from India and France and Germany yesterday, Finland, Australia, Wales. Lots of great people coming, joining the channel, becoming a friendly neighborhood historian by liking and subscribing to the channel, getting notified, hitting that notification bell when I update content. I've got some long stream content coming out today. And of course, my usual short form videos, days in history, biographies, in memoriams of who passed away on this day in history, stuff like that. So this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, and if you want to become a friendly neighborhood historian, it's as easy as hitting that like button and subscribing and getting notified. And yesterday's live stream was a lot of fun. We had some great topics, but then we had some interruptions because I didn't hear it at first, but somebody had keen ears and noticed that there was a fire alarm, a smoke alarm going off, and it turned out it just needed a change of batteries. So got that done and then got busy with other stuff. Usually we are here every Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern and on Sundays at 4 p.m. Eastern. We have moved it back to 6:30 today because of some time constraints and obligations on my part. But I've got a few historical topics I want to discuss with you all, and if you enjoy this kind of content and want to see more of it, be sure to like and subscribe like I mentioned. We're about to hit 4,600 subscribers. I'm really excited, very grateful for all the support we've had in just 7 months. We're 7 months old, and we've gotten all this support, and it's really wonderful. We're trying to hit 5,000 by the end of the year, so that would be really, really incredible if we could do that. But be sure to like, subscribe, bring up any topics you want to talk about, any questions, anything on anything history, and even if I don't know about it, I will learn about it and talk about it later in the channel. If you subscribe, I do a special for subscribers. I do a topic of your choice. So you subscribe, you mention a topic, and I will do a video. I got a great subscriber yesterday who wants to learn more about the Scottish Reformation, so I will be doing at least a short form video on that. I've got other longer content I'm trying to do. I'm currently doing a short series on powerful female rulers. So if you want to learn about herstory, as it's called, this is the place to learn about it. And everything. So I've got a few topics, but anything you want to talk about, anything you want to discuss history-wise, would be happy to talk about. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. It's good to have you here. So let's see here. So there were a few things I wanted to talk about. Oh, I was going to mention, I really appreciate people who are tuning in on a Sunday. I know Sundays are busy. What's up? Welcome. Thank you for coming. It was nice to see you again. And you'll notice there's no smoke alarm going off, so I don't have to put out any fires. It was just an issue of batteries. But I appreciate everybody coming to the channel on a Sunday, and if you like and subscribe, that would be really, really great. Helps the channel grow. Sundays are usually a very busy time for a lot of people. A lot of people are watching football. I know I'm watching football. Maybe if you're not in the United States or you're somewhere else, maybe you're not watching football. Maybe you're watching a movie, or you're going for a drive with your family or your friends. And that became a common habit just over a century ago in the 1920s. Church attendance actually plummeted during the 1920s because of the rise of consumer culture. So that's one of the topics I wanted to discuss with you today. I'm glad you're not watching football. I'm glad you're watching me. Maharana Pratap. I'm not exactly sure. I think, was that an Indian ruler? No, this is not football. Though we toss the football around intellectually, metaphorically speaking. And that's true. You play football. Of course, football, as most people in the United States understand it, is American football with, touchdowns and cheerleaders and things like that. But real football is, of course, soccer, which includes the use of feet, much more than football might. So you feel like I am more democratic. Thanks, I guess. I like that. I do political content. I try to be as objective as possible, but I do a weekly update on politics, so go check out those videos. Those are a lot of fun. I need to make a playlist for them. I realized this election was going to be historic a few months ago, so I have been talking about it ever since. I try to do it from an objective point of view, and I've had people call me a right-wing bigot and a left-wing loony, so I've gotten it all. And yes, the pigskin football. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. Can I talk about Genghis Khan? Yes, so Genghis Khan, obviously one of the most famous conquerors of all time, also one of the most famous lovers of all time, has a bunch of people who are descended from him because he basically decided to impregnate every single woman that he could. And basically had a bunch of children with her. And I don't know about Mrs. Harris myself. I'm not going to comment on that. But Genghis Khan may have very well found her attractive and wanted to have a child with her because he wanted to have a child with basically every single woman he ran into. So the way Genghis Khan created the Mongol horde was by defeating all the other Mongol chieftain and rallying the Mongols around him. And at a Kurultai, which was a council, they decided that he would be the ruler. And unlike previous Mongols, because the Mongols were nomadic peoples who liked to run on their horses and go around Mongolia and kind of stay to themselves and hunt and gather when they needed, Genghis decided that they needed to expand outward. And so they attack China, mainly targeting the Song dynasty, and they conquer a large amount of land. They're able to move really fast because they're mainly horse riders, and there's a lot of them. So there's a lot of horse riders and stuff like that, and they have a really large forces. And the best thing about the Mongol cavalry is not only that there's a huge amount of them, but they are also able to master horse archery. And because they're able to use bows and arrows while riding their horses, they are extraordinarily effective at defeating and destroying their enemies. Genghis is not, so Genghis is the mispronunciation that we use. It's Chenghis, and his last name is not Khan. It's not Mr. Khan. Khan means ruler. It's a title, and Khaganate was the Great Khan, and that is what he became when the Mongols rallied around him in the early 1200s. And from there, his forces spread out, conquering basically everywhere. And the Mongols have this interesting paradox in their history. They were extraordinarily tolerant. They promoted trade, culture, and the arts when they were in power. But the way they got to power was through sheer ruthlessness. So on the one hand, their governance was actually pretty religiously tolerant, pretty tolerant of other cultures. They assimilated a lot. The Mongols who conquer Persia become Muslims and promote Islamic art and law. The Mongols who conquer the Song dynasty in China, Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis, they consider themselves to be truly Chinese, and they create the Yuan dynasty, which basically, through overinflation, spends itself into oblivion. And so, Chenghis. So, Chenghis is the better pronunciation. So Cheng, Cheng, Gis, Gis, I guess. I'm not exactly an expert on how to pronounce their names, but that is a better pronunciation of his name than the Western way that it is used. What was my SAT score? I don't remember off the top of my head. I didn't do too well the first time, so I retook it, and a lot of people, when they retake tests, do better the second time, and I did a lot better the second time. I think it was a different score because it was a different era, but like 1580. I don't know, something like that. Anyways, so Genghis Khan and his forces are able to spread everywhere. They are tolerant and understanding of their cultures. They even adapt to their culture when they conquer, be it in China or in Central Asia or in Persia or the Golden Horde, which basically conquers modern day Russia or a huge amount of it. That's pretty low. Genghis. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Genghis. You're thinking of a different test, at least as far as the Americans go. So, anyways, Genghis is able to conquer. I'm just going to keep using that because that's what people know him by. He's able to conquer a large amount of land, and the paradoxical thing is that as the Mongols conquer, they are extraordinarily ruthless. If people surrender and pay tribute, they will not oppress them. But if they do not surrender, they will kill them. They will depopulate entire areas. They actually decapitate cities. They burn cities to the ground with people alive in them. They are ruthless warriors and extremely cruel conquerors. But once they conquer, as long as they can be paid off and as long as they can become wealthy, it's they are not really a huge threat. What's wrong with my teeth? What's wrong with your teeth? Projection much? So, anyways, so the Mongols are. So you wanted to know a little bit more about Genghis Khan. That is what happens with him. He builds up a large empire in northeastern Asia. He's already conquered a large amount of China under the Song dynasty, and his forces are constantly expanding. The Mongols are constantly trying to conquer. It will actually be his grandsons who continue the expansion. Batu Khan will create the Golden Horde that conquers Russia, what was called the Kievan Rus back then. Kublai Khan will conquer China and create the Yuan dynasty, and Ogadai, his son, will conquer Central Asia. So the Mongols get really, really close to invading Europe, but they go back because they have to pronounce a new emperor and never get going into Eastern Europe trying to conquer it. They are actually defeated when they try to conquer Vietnam. They are not able to conquer India, and they are turned back by the Mamluk Sultanate. So they get into Persia, and they're trying to get into the Middle East, but the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt and Palestine is able to turn them back. So, anyways, let's see here. You don't smoke, drink, or ever done drugs. Uh, we're talking about normal history, not my history. So, anyway, so that's a little bit about Genghis Khan. And as I was talking, so I appreciate that person who asked. If you're enjoying this kind of content and you like learning about history and social sciences, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and it helps you learn more about history. And you are officially a certified friendly neighborhood historian at that point. So that's always a lot of fun. Tell me my family history. Well, I had parents and siblings. There you go. That's a family history. So, anyways, I was saying how grateful I am that people have been showing up on a Sunday when you guys could otherwise be watching football or going for a ride, like people started doing in the 1920s. During the what? Anyways, so during the 1920s, there was a rise in consumer culture that allowed people to basically drive their cars all around. So cars become much more common in the 20s after World War I. They are mass-produced thanks to Henry Ford's assembly line, and the Model T is the car everybody has to have. The Thin Lizzy is what everyone wants to have, and they use that to drive all around. And church attendance actually drops because people take their Sundays to go out and go on a drive. And this is a reference in songs and in pop culture, people going on rides on Sunday afternoons or mornings. So, anyways, what was I going to say? So consumer culture is in the rise in the 1920s, and if people are not driving around in their new cars, most of them Model Ts, which are now very affordable, and as they become more affordable, they become more mass-produced, and as they're more mass-produced, they're more affordable, so more and more people are buying them. When they get home, they can wash their clothes that might have gotten dirty if they went on a picnic or something like that by using their new washing machines. Washing machines become an emerging part of consumer culture. Usually, every one of these consumer goods starts off as something extraordinarily exclusive and very, very expensive. However, once they become mass-produced and once more and more people are able to buy them, their prices drop and the margins drop, and you all of a sudden see them mass-produced everywhere. And so this is the case throughout history with consumer goods. It starts off as something that only the rich can afford, and they're kind of fangled things that are clunky and hard to use. Think of like the first cell phones from the 80s. And then all of a sudden, they become much more simple, much more advanced, and much more easy, and all of a sudden normal people can afford them. And the companies that produce them make far more money when millions of people can buy them for much cheaper than hundreds of people can buy them for much more expensive. Tell me about Koreans having the longest unbroken chain of slavery. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Tell me about the rise of Hitler. I can get to the rise of Hitler. That actually ties in exactly to what I was talking about. But the Koreans, like the Chinese, and any other society in East Asia, and any other society in Africa, and any other society in Europe, enslaved their own people and enslaved other peoples. And the Koreans were actually enslaved and conquered many times by the Chinese, including the Mongols, and also by the Japanese. So, Raman Ujan. I don't know exactly who that is, but I need to look into that. You mentioned a couple of really interesting names that I want to look more into. So with the rise in consumer culture, you not only have Model Ts and other cars, you also have, like I mentioned, the rise of washing machines. And when people come in when their clothes are washing, they can sit around and listen to radio stations because now hundreds of them are popping up in the US alone. The same phenomenon is going on in England and in Europe. And just like the prosperity of the 1920s and jazz, because that's the thing they're listening to on the radio is new jazz music, just like those things are spreading from the US to Europe, the Great Depression, which hits at the end of the 1920s, is also going to spread to Europe. It's going to destabilize the economies of the largest empires in the world, Britain and France, and it's going to destabilize the German economy, which was already struggling in the 1920s because they had to pay back war debt for World War I. Because the German economy is really hit hard and people are really suffering, they turn to extreme parties of the communists and the Nazis. And with the rise in interest in communists and Nazis, the German government, scared about communists taking over and spreading the Bolshevik Revolution from Russia into Germany, the German government, which is somewhat conservative, asks Hitler to form a coalition government. President Paul von Hindenburg believed that Hitler, who was a war hero from World War I, believed that Hitler was more bark than bite and could actually help the conservatives keep control of Germany and keep it from going into a communist revolution. And so Hitler use the German conservatives in the German parliament, known as the Reichstag, to start to overthrow the government. He promised originally he would not do this, but like all dictators and like all megalomaniacs, he lied. So he basically rises, never let a crisis go to waste, basically, is the ideology there. And Hitler never let the crises that Germany had to face following World War I, and especially during the Great Depression, go to waste. And the Nazis, basically, because they've got brown shirts, which are roaming gangs of thugs who are willing to beat up their opponents at all times, and because they have a growing number of soldiers. So they have paramilitary groups, they have youth groups, and they have a growing army that become known as the SA, or stormtroopers. That's where George Lucas got stormtroopers from. It's a Nazi term. In fact, Star Wars is an allegory for the Second World War in many, many ways, and an allegory for rebelling against dictatorships and all other things, and fighting at tyranny. But anyways, point being that Hitler basically is able to use his street thugs to intimidate his political opponents and rivals, just as Mussolini had a decade earlier to make Italy fascist. Hitler, who praised Mussolini and thought he was excellent, followed a similar pattern. Interestingly enough, Mussolini wasn't so sure about Hitler, especially with the Nazi racism, because he wasn't part of the Aryan master race, and he knew that Hitler despised other European groups, especially Slavs, but also Italians. So he wasn't so sure, but he admired Hitler's military prowess and strength during the beginning of World War II, and that's why he joins forces with the Nazis. That's why Italy joins the Second World War. But anyway, so the Nazis' rise to power, as somebody was asking about, is basically based in the idea of using street tactics and thugs to intimidate your political opponents, and using the press to lie. This is where Joseph Goebbels comes in with the Ministry of Propaganda. And you also have, of course, the scapegoating of the Jews, blaming them and the communists for everything wrong with Germany, and by creating multiple paradigms of us versus them, creating a scapegoat, and basically telling the German people, you are not at fault for the problems, other people are at fault for the problems. Hitler is able to slowly but surely rise to power, and some horrible miscalculations by conservatives in the government basically allow the Nazis to become the preeminent party. And then Hitler, not letting a crisis go to waste, after the Reichstag building is bombed by an alleged communist, he uses that opportunity to gain the Enabling Acts, which allows him to become basically, he's called the Chancellor, but it allows him to become both Chancellor and President, and that makes him the Führer, the leader. And so at that point, the Nazi rise to power is secure, and they're going to hold on to power for another decade in Germany. So, Jimmy Saville, don't know who that is. Oh, geez. Let me see. I've got a few people in the chat. So somebody said they wanted to know about the rise of Adolf Hitler, and that's why I'm talking about it. If you're just joining the channel, and that sounds very strange, I am not talking about that because of any admiration for the Nazis. Somebody asked me to talk about it, so that's what I do. And if you enjoy what I do and you enjoy listening to this, like and subscribe because it helps the channel grow. Our goal is to hit 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I believe that Ramun Unjan is Asian, but I don't know exactly who he is. Roaring 20s. I was just talking about the Roaring 20s with the rise of consumer culture. I wouldn't say that the Nazis won democratically. The German government was a series of coalitions parties where there were different parties that grouped together, and there was a coalition on the right that took power, and the Nazis were the biggest party in that. So they were democratically elected, but basically from that point they didn't use any sort of democratic legislation or appeal to control people or to put Hitler in charge of the entire country. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. Good to have you here. I don't think I'm going to be going on that podcast. I'd be happy to join any history podcast. If people want to seriously talk about history, I'll talk about it endlessly. It's what I do. It's what I do every Saturday at 6 o'clock Eastern and every Sunday, usually at 4 o'clock Eastern, but we got a late start today, so 6:30 Eastern is what we are going with, and I will be talking for another 40 minutes or so about all things social sciences, social studies, and history related. So if you have anything you want to bring up regarding to that, drop it in the chat, and I will be sure to discuss it with all of you. But I wanted to talk about the rise in consumer culture, and that segued into talking about the rise of the Nazis somehow. So we will bring that up. No, I am not in jail. Fortunately, I am not in a house that is burning down because my smoke alarm is not going off. Shout out to yesterday's live stream. Anyways, what else did I want to talk about with all of you wonderful people? There were a few other things I wanted to talk about. Oh, I wanted to talk about what nobody expected me to talk about and what nobody ever expects. Nobody ever expects the Spanish Inquisition. Oh yeah. Well, no. This shirt is not orange. It is black because orange is the new black. So there you go. I believe this is what they call Trump orange. But anyways, so no, definitely no, not. And at last time I checked, most prison uniforms do not have the collar, so or the buttons. Anyways, so but thank you for coming. And no, I would not be live streaming from jail. I would be too busy being in jail. Do I believe Jews are satanic? No, I don't believe any group of people is satanic. I don't know if you're just trolling or if you're actually being sincere. I have used people trolling as a way to talk about important historical things and phenomenon, and actually bringing up the Jewish people is a good segue into talking about what nobody expects, because nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, and that was one of the topics I wanted to discuss with you fine people. So, the Spanish Inquisition is something that is one of the most well-known torture sections in European history and in world history. Its impact has been written about constantly. It has been exaggerated. It has been used to criticize the Europeans, to criticize the church, to rightly condemn anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So, what's your thoughts on the Holocaust then? I'll be getting to that in a second. In many ways, the Spanish Inquisition is an example of the anti-Semitism that was rampant in Europe. Hitler and the Nazis did not just suddenly start hating Jews out of nowhere. And Hitler didn't have, although his animus has obviously led to the horrific deaths of millions of people, anti-Semitic sentiments, hatred of the Jews, the hope that they would go away and disappear was not restricted to the Germans. The Russians would routinely assault and harass Jews, burn their stores, violate their women, destroy their businesses, and try to make them leave in what are called pogroms. And those were common throughout the 19th century. The English kicked the Jews out of England. The French kicked the Jews out of France. In fact, one of the reasons there are so many Jews in Poland who suffer through the atrocities of the Holocaust is because centuries before, the Polish had been the only kingdom in Europe that had allowed them to live peacefully and not be harassed when the French and the British and the Holy Roman Empire were kicking them out. So the truth of the matter is, the Spanish Inquisition was an example of anti-Semitism because you had Jews who were living in Spain who were baptized as Christians, oftentimes without them even knowing, because in Catholicism, babies are baptized, who were then held accountable for heresy because they had grown up practicing Judaism, and this happened with Muslims too, who lived in Spain because the Muslims had once controlled Spain. And they were then put on trial for being heretics for practicing their Judaism and their Islam, even though they had never known Christianity before. But because they were supposedly on a list of people who had been baptized, they were part of the church, and so they were considered heretics. So they were brought before the Inquisition, they were put in prison, they were tortured until they confessed, and oftentimes they were murdered. And these were church councils that lasted throughout the 15th, 16th century, and it was eventually, I don't think it was disbanded until the 19th century. And although a lot of people have said that it led to the deaths of millions of people, it is probably more in the thousands. Something the Spanish did to take care to continue their anti-Semitism and to continue their Islamophobia was to exile and banish groups of Jews and Muslims, even those who had nothing to do with the Muslim conquest of Spain, and even some of them who had indeed converted to Christianity. There were a group of people who were called Moriscos, who were banished from Spain in the early 1600s and sent to live in North Africa because they were the descendants of the Moors who had controlled Spain some centuries before. So what are my thoughts on the Holocaust? Obviously, the absolute worst atrocity of anti-Semitism, with 11 million people dying, 6 million of them Jews, 5 million of them communist, homosexuals, Slavs, and other people the Nazis considered undesirable. It's one of the most awful events in human history, and it's a crescendo of horrifying anti-Semitism that had existed in Europe for 1,500 years. As long as there had been division between Christian and Jews, there were a lot of Christians, especially in the Catholic Church, who believed that the Jews were the enemies and that they were the ones who were responsible for killing Christ. When the Roman Empire falls and the Catholic Church kind of takes its place in Europe in the 500s, 600s AD, it would be difficult for them to say what is historically accurate is that the Romans had indeed killed Jesus, because the Roman Catholic Church was now the central dominant political and religious power in all of Europe, and they don't want themselves connected back to the Roman Empire. So instead, the narrative shifts to it was the Jews who killed him, even though the Jews did not have the authority to crucify. The Jews did not crucify him. Some of the Jewish leaders arrested him and asked for his execution. So, hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. It's good to see you again, and I hope you notice that there's no smoke alarm going off. It was a few of the Jewish rabbis, but remember, if you read the accounts, the gospel accounts, many of the Jews supported Jesus, and many of the Jews liked Jesus, and these were the same. And many of the people were laying down garments, calling him blessed, Hosanna, all of that. So, yes, that's very true about the Inquisition. So the Inquisition kind of worked both ways. To avoid the Inquisition, some people would pretend to be Jewish or Muslim, because people who had grown up Jewish and Muslim who had not been baptized were not ever persecuted. They were sometimes exiled, mistreated, but they would not be arrested and put on trial or executed by the Inquisition because they were of a different religion. It was only supposed to be people who had been Christians, who had supposedly become heretics, who were supposed to be put on trial and were often tortured, interrogated, and executed in the Inquisition. Yes, basically every group has good and bad people, exactly. Yes, if you believe the spiritual side of things, yes, Jesus supposedly succumbs to his fate. He gives up his life for his friends, as he says. So, why do the Nazis hide the bodies but not the shoes? Because the Nazis were interested. I love seeing that. I've seen that on the internet so much recently, and I'm so surprised people are falling for that nonsense. They're taking their stuff. Part of what they did to the Jewish people wasn't just to humiliate them and kill them, but they confiscated their wealth. They confiscated their art. They confiscated their businesses. They took their supplies. They took their resources, their belongings. It was a way of humiliating them, but also enriching themselves. What are my thoughts about the Nazis' involvement in Antarctica? Obviously, I don't believe the Nazis ever made it to Antarctica. That's a popular conspiracy theory. I do believe that many Nazis were able to escape. Hitler was not one of them. And some of them went to South America. Some of them came to the United States. In fact, the United States hired certain Nazi scientists and basically gave them immunity if they would work for the American science community and later in NASA to help the United States, especially during the Cold War. Werner von Braun, who developed the V-2 rocket, was brought over and used by NASA and the United States to improve its space program. Joseph Mengele, who did horrible, terrifying, awful experiments on the Jews, the angel of death, I think the Nazi angel of death is what they called him, was brought. Was not brought. He escaped and lived in Argentina and was never found. Adolf Eichmann was traced down to South America, where he was found by Israel and killed and executed for his crimes against humanity in the early 1960s. Talk about aliens base. Yeah, I don't know. I don't believe there's any alien bases there. Interesting. That's fascinating. So in Jerusalem, they did not go for any process or anything like that. Very fascinating. Yes, I don't. As much as I can, you're gonna have to show me some evidence for that. I'm willing to believe anything that's evidence. Something I see on a lot on the channel is people bringing up things. Sometimes it's a correction of what I'm saying. Sometimes it's adding more information. I love to be corrected. I love to learn. People point out mistakes I make all the time. It's just part of who I am. I'm a human, so I make mistakes. I'm trying to learn and grow, and that's what makes the channel better. I learn and grow with the way I produce content. I learn and grow with the amount of knowledge I have. I learn and grow about topics that I can discuss. I am interested. I don't know a huge amount about linguistics, but I need to learn more about it. But of course, I am interested in learning more languages, because the more languages you know, the more you can communicate with other people. I did do a Cinco de Mayo video in May, not that last year, in May, and I tried to I want to find a way to be able to do the videos in Spanish, maybe find a Spanish transcript and read it, because I do speak some Spanish. I'm not sure about multiple dimensions, multiverse. I'm not sure if there is anything like that going on. There very well might be, but I'm not the one to speak to that. I'm speaking about human history and the history of humans on this planet. Admiral Robert Byrd, are you referring to what you guys were talking about with aliens in Antarctica? I believe Admiral Byrd was one of the first people to get to Antarctica, the South Pole. So that's basically all I know there. So yeah, the Spanish Inquisition is a way for the Europeans to, the Spanish in particular, and their Inquisition actually occurred in different places throughout Europe, but the Spanish one is the most notorious one because it killed the most people and it targeted the most amount of heretics, quote unquote heretics, because for them, like I said, you had a lot of people who were baptized as Jews, baptized as Muslims, who were Jews and Muslims baptized as Christians, as Catholic Christians, who supposedly did not know about it, obviously, and were practicing as Jews and Muslims because they grew up in Jewish and Muslim cultures, and were persecuted, targeted, interrogated, tortured, and killed. And the Spanish, when they defeated the Muslims and kicked them out of Spain in 1492, soon afterwards exiled the remaining Muslims and Jews living in Spain. And in the early 1600s, they kicked out the descendants of the Muslims who had converted to Christianity. So the Spanish were extraordinarily chauvinistic. They were extraordinarily anti-Semitic and Islamophobic. And they had fought for centuries. Castile and Aragon were the two main principalities to regain Spain from the Muslims who had conquered it in the late 600s. In fact, the reason Portugal is a separate entity from Spain is that Portugal got its independence as a nation from the Muslims before the Spanish did. And so their language and culture developed differently. Let me see here. So I've got some stuff. Jesus was a creation of the Flavian dynasty, a way they could rule. So the Flavian dynasty with Emperor Vespasian, I just finished a really fun series talking about the Roman emperors, so go check that out. The Flavians appear you're thinking of Flavius Josephus, who is adopted by the Flavians and is patronized by the Flavian emperors and writes his famous histories about the Jewish wars and talks about Jesus. Jesus is attested to in the histories of both Flavius and Tacitus. The New Testament Gospels are probably written contemporarily to that, or even perhaps earlier than that. The evidence and the tradition of both the Jews and the Christian church shows that there were people who were believing in Christus, who they believed that was the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, this Rabbi Yeshua, long before the Flavians, decades before the Flavians came to power. So that would not be necessarily accurate. But I can see why you would think that because of the Flavians forcing Josephus to write this history in which he talks about the existence of Jesus of Nazareth. Could you share something about Polish history that you find interesting? Well, I find a lot of Polish history extraordinarily interesting, and I've been learning more about it recently. What I find fascinating about Poland is that Poland actually may be the reason for two important historical features. One, that the Muslims never were able to conquer Europe, and two, that why the September 11th attacks happened on September 11th. Because it was a Polish king, Jan Sobieski, John III, who was able to rally the Catholic forces and defeat the Muslims when they besieged the Austrian capital of Vienna. If the Muslims had been able to defeat the Austrians, they might have been able to conquer the Austrian Empire, invade the Holy Roman Empire, and endanger Italy and the Pope. But Jan Sobieski led the Polish forces. He was in charge of what was called the Holy League, which was a group of different Catholic kingdoms and principalities, all fighting to protect the faith, supposedly, defensor fidei. And they were able to withstand and defeat the Muslim siege at Vienna in 1681, and they defeated them on September 11th to the 12th. So that day was a huge defeat for the Ottoman Empire and was stuck in the psyche of radical and militant Islam in its existential fight against Christianity, and Christianity in its existential fight against radical Islam. So there's something. So Jan Sobieski, one of the best monarchs in European history, the ruler of what was called the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, where Poland and Lithuania actually combined into a large, you could almost call it an empire. It's a big kingdom in northeastern Europe, in the Baltic, and of course in Poland. This kingdom actually got very close to conquering the Russians in the early 1600s, and in 1657 they made an agreement with Frederick of Prussia to give him land in Brandenburg, Prussia, creating the Duchy of Prussia. Prussia would later go on to conquer all of Germany. So those are some interesting things about Polish history there. So the Polish create the Prussians, they defeat the Ottomans and keep them from destroying the Austrian Empire and maybe taking over huge areas of Europe. And they defeat they break that siege on September the 11th, which is why that day became so crucial for getting back at the Christians from the perspective of the militant Muslims, and against the West, obviously. No, a lot of people are starting to see history repeating itself. And I love Mark Twain's quote that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And there's a lot of things, people are seeing patterns between 2020s America and 1930s Germany a lot of the time. So you are not alone, and it is not weird. Let's see here. Yeah, a lot of religion is all about the money. So you've got that. A lot of people want to be shown the money. They want to be able to control people. There's a huge example, and the argument really is religion just made that way, or is it people abusing religion for their purposes? Is the message of religions to become rich and powerful and influential, or is it people using the message of a religion that's already popular to become rich and powerful and controlling in their own way? The reason I say that is I've never felt. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of cultural blending, and you feel like you're getting back into the history when you learn the language and when you learn the reasons for the language, which is linguistics. So that's a very good thing you brought up. Okay. The Polish. Yeah, the Polish are very proud people with a history that you can be proud of. It's very fascinating, and Poland has been broken apart, partitioned, controlled by the Russians. It's been controlled by the Germans. It's been, of course, the Soviets and the Germans divided at the beginning of World War II, speaking of Hitler and the Nazis in 1930s Germany. But it always comes back. It always reemerges. And today, actually, I do daily Today in History videos. Solidarity was formed, which was the labor union that helped bring down communism in Poland during the 1980s, when the Soviet Union was basically forcing Poland to have a communist government. So interestingly enough, Solidarity, the union led by Lech Walesa, that helped free Poland from communism, was formed on this day. And so Poland has struggled, but it's always stayed around. It's always remained true to its roots and its proud history. And if I'm correct, it is the European country that is easternmost that actually is Catholic, because a lot of the area around that is Orthodox Christian and not Catholic. So, and it's also one of the hardest languages to learn. We were talking about linguistics, but it would be a fascinating language to learn. The Arabs stabbed the Ottomans in the back. Oh, that's kind of true. The Arabs have been chafing under the Ottoman rule for centuries. In the 1500s, the Ottoman Empire, which was the largest growing empire in the world at the time and the most intimidating and existential threat to Christian Europe, but also to the Safavid Persians and to other groups in North Africa, conquered Arabia, and especially Mecca and Medina, the two most important cities in Islam. And so from then on, they could say that they were in charge of the Muslim state, the Muslim caliphate. And so in the 1910s, when the Ottoman Empire, which has really declined by this point, joins with the British, joins Germany and Austria-Hungary in World War I and is fighting against the British send military advisors, soldiers, and their own officer corps, led by one of their leaders is a man named T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, to Arabia to help them throw off the Ottomans and to rebel. And so the Arabs rebel against the Muslims because they want to create their own state. And eventually they do under the Saud family, which is why it is called Saudi Arabia. Do I know about World War II? Yes, I know. Do you know about World War II? Do you know why World War II started? And do you know why World War I started? Yes, I talk about it on the channel a lot. I've got several videos about that. I've even got one that I did September 1st, which was the 85th anniversary of when Germany invaded Poland, which is when a lot of people believe when World War II started. I technically believe that World War II started in 1937 at the Marco Polo Bridge incident when Japan invaded China starting the Second Sino-Japanese War, because Japan is obviously going to go into this. Today, actually, is the anniversary of when Japan officially invaded French Indochina, which was Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And it's not the French that kicked the Japanese out of there, it's the native peoples. In Vietnam, they are led by a man named Ho Chi Minh. So that's where that starts. But basically, why does World War One? So I'll go from one to the other. Yes, I know a lot about World War II. I'm talking about it a little bit right now. World War II starts because the Allies, after years of trying to appease Hitler, and I'm talking about the Allies, Britain and France, are horrified to find out that he's made an alliance with the Russians, and they promised to protect Polish independence and freedom, which they'd promised since Poland had been reorganized after World War One. And they basically, when Poland is invaded by the Nazis, they mobilize. And when they mobilize, their navies mobilize and their international forces mobilize. So both of them have extensive empires in Africa. They're going to get involved in the war effort. They both have colonies in Asia. Those colonies are going to get involved in the war effort. India, Australia, Canada, South Africa, Egypt, Ghana, and Kenya. These are British colonies. They're going to get involved. Indochina, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Mali, Algeria, they're going to get involved because they're French colonies. So that's what makes it a world war for a lot of scholars, is that there are huge amounts of soldiers involved from all over the world, all of a sudden just engaged like that overnight. So why does World War II start? Basically, the Allies stop beating around the bush and finally confront Hitler. Why does World War II start in Asia, which is where I think it technically you should say it started? For years, Japan had been picking off land from China. They had already taken over Manchuria in northeastern China on the border of Russia, and the Japanese were extraordinarily aggressive, and the Chinese were getting tired of it. And so at the Marco Polo Bridge incident, they had an incident. They started fighting with each other. China is already divided between the communists and the nationalists. The nationalists are led by, they were first led by Sun Yat-sen, and then Jiang Zemin, as the Chinese call him, which is actually, the Americans called him Chiang Kai-shek. And of course, the communists are led by Mao Zedong. And they are going to fight, they're going to rally and unite to fight against the Japanese, and the Americans and the British are going to help them. So that's why World War II started. World War I starts because, so it's the aggressiveness of the Axis powers, because Germany goes into Poland, Japan goes into China, and Italy is going into Ethiopia and fighting against Ethiopia and their emperor, Haile Selassie. Why does World War I start? Basically, you have a bunch of dominoes falling over, and after the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne is killed by a Serbian, they demand that Serbia gives in. Serbia refuses. The Austro-Hungarians attack Serbia. Russia joins to defend the Serbians, and Germany, promising the Austrians to deal with Russia, attacks Russia. France and Russia have an alliance, so France joins, and that means all of France's colonies join. And Russia is the largest country in the world, so that's a huge amount of land already joining. Germany and its colonies have joined. Austria-Hungary, which is an empire in Central Europe, they're in the war. And then the British and then the Germans, in order to invade France, go through Belgium. Belgium is supposed to be eternally neutral. It's supposed to be a buffer zone between Germany and France. That was what it was created for. And when it's violated, the British are horrified at this, and they join the war. And so do all of their colonies, like India and Egypt and Australia. So that is why, a quick explanation as to why World War I and World War II started. I've gone into a lot more detail on it in the channel. I want to get to more of the comments. That's why I'm kind of giving you the shorter version. My family lineage goes back to the 8th century with the kings and queens of Norway. Really? That is really awesome. If that's true, that's fascinating. I'd like you to tell me more about that. Yes, tell me about the family. Welcome. I love it. From Tunisia. Awesome place. One of the most interesting areas in the world. The ancient home of the Carthaginians. Yes, reading history books in other languages is really important. Long live Lenin. Long live Lenin. I don't know if you're being a troll, but I wouldn't be saying that Lenin is kind of a difficult guy. Stalin, Marx. Okay, maybe you're just trolling at this point. Okay. Bulgarian history. Yeah, they don't get covered very much. Bulgaria, I was just talking about World War I. They're actually part of World War I. They joined the Germans and the Austrians. Bulgaria actually had an empire in the Balkans in southeastern Europe that actually defeated and controlled the Byzantines for a while in like the 11th century, I think. And then then they were conquered by the Ottomans, and they got their independence in the 19th century, the same time that Greece and other Balkan states started to get their independence by defeating the Ottoman Empire. I don't know a huge amount about Bulgarian history, but it's really fascinating. I know one of my favorite YouTubers is Epimetheus. He has an amazing channel, and I hope he tunes into this at some point and subscribes. But he has videos about individual countries that are just superb, and he has a really good one about Bulgaria. But Bulgaria in the past has had its own really powerful empire. It obviously fights in World War I and loses. I think in World War II it tries to stay neutral, but was occupied by the Nazis. And throughout the Renaissance, 1600s, 1700s, it was controlled by the Ottomans. And that region had been an empire that had challenged the Byzantines for control of southeastern Europe, known as the Balkans. So, the Iran-Contra affair, yes. So, the Iran-Contra affair is one of the biggest stains on the legacy of President Ronald Reagan in the United States. Basically, Reagan believes that the Contras, who are Contra, meaning opposed, they are a group of people in Nicaragua fighting against a communist government, need to be supported by the United States. So he directs his CIA, I forget the name of the CIA director in Reagan's presidency, to send weapons to them. But he knows Congress is not going to approve it, so he purchases the weapons through basically illegal means through the Iranians. Now, this is a controversy not just because there's no precedent for this, the president can't do this, but also because the Iranians were obviously a hostile regime that just a few years ago had captured a bunch of hostages, and in the Iranian Revolution, many of them have been Americans. So the Iranians are not popular in America, so doing this, you're going through one enemy to try to defeat another. And basically, the Reagan machine was able to give weapons to the Contras so that they could fight against Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas, the communists who controlled Nicaragua. However, the problem is that Congress finds out it's a big scandal for Reagan. Reagan denies any involvement of it. He mentions his own mistakes in it, but at the end of the day, Colonel Oliver North, who helped lead the movement, basically refuses to testify against Reagan and refuses to indict people in his cabinet. He's held in contempt of Congress and he goes to jail for it. And it is considered a scandal that could have brought down Reagan's presidency in a time when Reagan was otherwise very popular, doing what he could to end the Cold War and had some other successes too. So, yes, you could say the Arabs conquered the Turks intellectually because of Islam and because of the Ottomans. That is very fair. Altar ibn al-Ad. I don't know who that is, but I should look him up. Yes, the Ottomans basically redress all of the Arabic and ancient Islamic customs and say we are the representatives of Islam. And if you study Islamic history, you find that every single caliphate, no matter where they came from, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Mamelukes, the Ayyubids, these different sultanates and caliphates, and the Ottomans, all the way down to the Ottomans, have always said that they are the true heirs of Islam, and they are the real representatives of Islam, and they are the correct Islamic State and they are really, of course, taking from the Arabic culture where Islam came from. Yeah, I wouldn't say the Hebrews and the Jews are two different people specifically. Obviously, the Jews have a much longer history of being in other parts of the world and intermarrying and stuff, and so that's why you have Sephardic Jews, you have Mizrahi Jew, the Mizrahim, and you have the, of course, Ashkenazi Jews, which are the Jews most people think of. Those are the European Jews. Interesting, right? Your family fought for Poland. When did they fight for Poland? Poland actually was able to stop the Marxists in Russia, Lenin, and the communists from going into Europe. After World War I, when Bolshevism takes over Russia, Lenin wanted to spread communism to the rest of Europe through violent means, and he invades Poland. But President Joseph Pilsudski, such a hard name to pronounce, Pilsudski was able to stop the Pilsudski is able to stop the Russians. So that's an interesting war there. Yeah, every family has done bad things to other people's families. That's just how history works. I haven't played much Mass Effect. I don't find it to be that. I love RPGs, but I don't find it to be that much interesting. But anyways, heroics during World War II as the Messiah. So, and by the way, if you are enjoying and liking what I am talking about, and you like the history, you like the social sciences, and you are learning something, be sure to like and subscribe. And you are officially a certified member of the Friendly Neighborhood Historians. So it's good to have everybody here. Some really good comments and questions. Yeah, basically, the Soviets surprised the entire world because everyone thinks that the Soviets hate the Germans and vice versa, and they make this agreement called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It's a non-aggression pact where they agree not to attack each other and divide up Poland. Hitler, like he was doing on so many things, lies about this and invades the Soviet Union later on. But a lot of people do not know that they were actually kind of becoming allies. And there is some historical evidence that Stalin wanted Hitler to succeed so that he could foment communist revolution in Nazi-controlled areas. I do know a little bit about the wars between India and Pakistan, but I need to learn a little bit more. I know there's a lot of conflict. Somebody was bringing it up yesterday over the region of Kashmir. Why didn't Spain fight in any of the world wars? That's a good question. I was just thinking about this yesterday. I don't know why Spain doesn't get involved in World War I. By the 20th century, Spain is in extreme decline. Its empire has been ended. The United States actually officially destroys the Spanish Empire by conquering the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba in the late 1800s. And so the Spanish are not strong. They've become politically inept. And so although the Russians called the Ottomans the sick man of Europe, the Spanish are the real sick man of Europe, and they don't have any real dog in the fight in World War I. That is why it's called the Spanish flu, the influenza pandemic. Once again, a century ago, right around the parallel to the COVID pandemic, because the original news of it wasn't breaking in areas of World War I because the attention was on the war, and they were actually censoring what kind of press and speech was allowed in certain areas. So Spain was the first country that they actually reported the influenza pandemic, but the pandemic probably started in the dirty trenches where soldiers got sick all the time in World War I. But Spain was the first country to report on it, and that's why it's called the Spanish flu. Yes, George Washington had fake teeth. A lot of people think they were made out of wood. It is most likely they were made out of ivory and perhaps bone, perhaps even human bone and the bones of dead slaves. Yeah, the USSR was trying to make India as socialistic and communistic as possible, and they were successful. And yes, William J. Casey, that's his name. But they are foreign. I don't know what you mean by that. Yeah, the USSR did defeat the Germans, but it didn't look that way in 1941, and no one expected them to first work together. In fact, while Hitler is doing what he's doing in 1940 in France and the Netherlands, the Soviets are going into Finland, and it's called the Northern War, and the Finnish are actually able to hold off the Soviets. Interesting. You're learning Bulgarian. That's so fascinating. I bet it's an amazing language. Yeah, we do go over a bunch of different topics. I do try to do set topics, but if people bring up stuff, I'd like to discuss what they want to talk about. This is my gift to you because throughout the week, if you watch the content, if you enjoy the channel, be sure to like and subscribe and get notified about that content. Throughout the week, I tend to get people who come and ask. I tend to post content that I'm learning about, or I find interesting, or I want to talk to you about, like my current series on powerful women rulers. The weekend Q&A is for you guys to be able to talk to me about whatever you want to talk about. So, wow, someone from Azerbaijan, welcome. I hope you're still in the chat. I know a lot of people have dropped off. Yeah. Yeah, Marx does give kind of a plan of how to achieve communism. A lot of people have tried to write off Stalin as betraying Marx. They even tried to do this with Lenin. However, Stalin certainly did not believe he was betraying Marx, and anyone who ever thought that in the Soviet Union would see the death of him. And he believed that by collectivizing the farms and by forcing industrialization, he was actually achieving Marx's goal of creating an industrialized society ready for real communism. So he definitely thought he was communistic. He definitely was devoted to Marx and devoted to Lenin. And Lenin believed that he was being devoted to Marx. He was just adjusting Marx for his society. But because he believed that a Marxist revolution could not occur in Russia at that time. Yes, the Great Game of Britain and Russia. I wrote my master's thesis on the Great Game between Britain and Russia, which I tend to think is the first Cold War. So the Cold War we obviously think of as the United States and Russia, But I think the real first Cold War is Britain and Russia trying to control as much of South and Central Asia as they can in the 1800s. They fight over Afghanistan. And it's all indirectly. They fight over Afghanistan indirectly. They fight over a lot of people. The British think they're trying to get to India. The Russians want as much land as possible. So, what George Washington identified himself as a dark-skinned or yes, that was, I guess, the self-identification thing. Yeah, the Europeans had ways of defining themselves that people just don't use anymore because they just kind of consider them white. But of course, the diversity is not talked about that much. But it was a huge factor to them back in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. Thank you for liking and subscribing, Simon. I really appreciate that. Yeah, that's kind of strange. I'm sorry that happened to you, but I appreciate you coming here because here is where I go beyond Wikipedia, I go beyond the articles on the internet, and I do my best to share as much knowledge about history and information with you. And if you like history, if you enjoy social studies, and if you enjoy what I'm talking about here on the channel, like and subscribe because it really helps the channel grow. And drop any kind of any questions or topic you would like me to discuss. I'll be sure to get to it. If you subscribe, I will do a video on a topic of your choice. Yes, yes. So I'm going to do more videos on the Great Game and discuss it more because I know a lot about it. Hello from India. Welcome. I had somebody come from India a few weeks back, and they were saying it was 4:30 a.m. and I started at like 6 p.m. Eastern time, and they said they couldn't sleep. And fortunately, after listening to me for a few minutes, they were able to sleep perfectly. So. Well, yeah, actually, the U.S. helps create the Taliban because they communicate with the Mujahideen to defeat the Soviets during the 1980s, and the leader of the Soviet Union, the leader of the Mujahideen is Osama bin Laden. So Afghanistan was not really better under Soviet times. The Soviets were trying to do, in some ways, what the United States was trying to do, nation build, and it didn't work well because Afghanistan is a tribalistic society, and the people have been that way ever since Alexander the Great conquered them, and they're not. Afghanistan didn't really form into a country with a centralized government until the 1700s. That is how tribalistic they are. If there's one unifying factor in who the Afghan people are, it is Islam. Yeah, the Great Game is a great read. Thank you for coming. I'm glad you're here. Oh, it's 5 a.m. Well, I appreciate you being here. Yes, I have. Yes, she definitely played her own great game. I have an upcoming video on Eleanor of Aquitaine. Tonight, I'm doing Theodora, the wife of the great Byzantine Emperor Justinian. I talked about Justinian yesterday, the last true Roman emperor, in my opinion. But yes, Eleanor of Aquitaine is getting her own video. That woman is incredibly strong, incredibly interesting. And what's amazing doing this video about powerful women is finding how many powerful women were able to lead their people outright, like Joan of Arc or Eleanor or Boudica or the Empress Dowager. However, a lot of women in history have also used their husbands and been able to work from the sidelines to get what they wanted. Livia Drusilla, the wife of Augustus, is a great example of this. And of course, Eleanor of Aquitaine is another woman who worked from the sidelines to get what she wanted, both in France and then in England, basically pitting empires and kings and rulers against each other. She's a fascinating character. Really, really a great one. So we are coming up on an hour. I'm going to wrap up the Q&A. I hope I got to everybody's questions, and if you were able to enjoy the content that we've been talking about, like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow. We're just about to hit 4,600 subscribers. I think we probably did that here, thanks to you guys, and my goal is 5,000 by the end of the year. Yeah, she was amazing. She played the long game. Definitely a strong woman. She's married. I'll talk about her briefly. She was married to the King of France, who is more obsessed in crusading. I'm trying to remember what his name was. It's not St. Louis the Ninth. Is it Louis the Seventh? I'm not sure. It was probably a Louis because there were 18 Louis. Good Lord. But what I was saying is she basically creates, she's able to influence the King of France and has an extremely powerful role at court. She is in charge of Aquitaine, which is the region in southwestern France. And when she is displeased with him, she leaves him and she marries the much younger King Henry II of England, and Henry Plantagenet of the Plantagenet line. And she gives him Aquitaine. So Aquitaine becomes part of the English kingdom because the English control Normandy, they control the land of Anjou in central France, they control Brittany in northwestern France, and they control Aquitaine. And so the English have a huge amount of land in France thanks to her, and this is what's called the Angevin Empire, where Henry II controls England. He's got Scotland, Ireland, and Wales under his thumb, and then he's got these huge amounts of lands in France. And so she's able to influence him and push him and promote him, and eventually she betrays him. She encourages her sons to rebel against him, thinking that he is washed up and insecure, and she promotes them to fight with him. And he spends most of the latter half of his reign fighting against his sons, Richard, Geoffrey, Henry, who all want to control as much land as possible. And he barely makes peace with his son Richard just in time for him to die. So Henry II had a tragic life, and part of that was because of Eleanor, but Eleanor was extremely powerful. She was extremely influential, first in the French court, and then in the court of King Henry II, Louis VII, yes. Do you know anything about Indian history? Quite a bit. We were talking about it a lot earlier. India is a fascinating place with an amazing history. It is home, in many scholars' views, Hinduism is the oldest religion in the world, and India is one of the most diverse areas in the world, with different regions, with different religions and cultures in those regions, and different languages. A lot of people think it's just Hindi. There's Tamil. There's a bunch of different dialects. Yes, I know a great deal about Indian history. Somebody was asking about the Mongols. India was one of the places the Mongols couldn't conquer. However, there was an empire in India in the 15 and 1600s called the Mughal Empire, and Mughal is the ancient Indian word for Mongol. And so the leader of the Mughal emperor was the man who created the Mughal emperor was related to the Mongols. And the Mughal Empire is probably India at its most powerful, and they're going to last all the way until the 1700s, when the British and the French show up and start dividing up the land. Hello, welcome from New Zealand. So, Mohammed Ghori. Who is Mohammed Ghori? So, yes, welcome. I love having people from all over the world come in and ask history questions and talk about history. New Zealand's an amazing, beautiful place. Yes, that's who it was. You're right, Mohammed Ghori. So, just a little bit about India there. Of course, India is eventually going to be the Dutch, the French, and the British are fighting for different areas because they love trading with India. Obviously, India is one of the biggest trade centers in the entire world, and is an extraordinarily popular place for the Europeans to go and trade, and is a way for them to get to China, Japan, areas like that, and trade there as well. Yeah, I don't wish that, and I don't think anyone wishes that. But anyways, so there's a little bit about Indian history. Obviously, it becomes a colony of the British, and it is eventually freed in the 1940s, and the British divide the Muslim majority area of Pakistan from India. Before that, India was one subcontinent that included Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. Those three countries emerge because of the British partition. Well, I'm not a U.S. historian. I just explained a bunch of history about India, so I'm not just a U.S. historian. I'm a historian from the U.S. I've been talking about this is a live Q&A that I do every Saturday and Sunday, where we talk history, social studies, anything you want to talk about related to those topics. And so people ask a bunch of different questions. So people have been asking about Indian history. Yeah, thank you. I'm very glad to hear that. I really appreciate that. If you like what you're hearing, if you like what I'm talking about, be sure to like and subscribe. That's true. India does have a lot of respect for the USSR. There was definitely a lot of overlap between them. India does experiment with socialism, which is a common thing of former imperial areas, because they see their imperial oppressors, be it the British, the French, or even the Americans, as capitalists, and so they become more interested in socialism and communism, which is what the U.S. is worried about during the Cold War, which is why they're trying to interfere all over the place to stop communism from spreading. Yeah. That's not true. What state am I from? I try to keep my identity as my location as discreet as possible. I think it's very obvious to a lot of people that I'm an American, so I don't even say anymore that you don't know which country I'm from. So if people ask, I'll say America, but America is large, so I can kind of get away with that. So I'm not going to quite disclose that, but I appreciate you being interested in who I am as a person. That's very nice of you. So we're at that point. We've been doing this for an hour. Again, if you like this, be sure to like, subscribe. We do this live Q&A every Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. in England, 12 p.m. in Cairo, or sorry, 12 a.m. in Cairo. I have my views. I don't have East or West Coast views. Yeah, that's fair. I can understand that too, and I'm not going to complain about that. I'm not going to say that that's wrong necessarily. But that doesn't mean necessarily that we want certain things to be back. China is great. China has an amazing history. I love Chinese history. I love Chinese culture. I love Chinese art, and I love Chinese government and politics. That doesn't make me necessarily a fan of Mao. So, anyways, so we are here again every Saturday, 6 p.m. Eastern, and every Sunday it's usually 4 p.m. Eastern, but we had to move that back. I'm not lying. I didn't say anything that was a lie. But anyways, I really appreciate everybody coming onto the channel. I'll take one more question if anyone has any. Why? Why do I like Chinese history? Because China has one of the most. Because if you read Chinese history and you study it, that'll be the last question I take, I guess. Because if you read Chinese history and study it, yeah, I understand that. Yeah. Okay, I'm your friend, you're mine. Yes, it's like we're in kindergarten. That's how you make friends. Just ask someone to be your friend and they'll do it. I do not. I need to learn about that. But like I was saying about the Chinese history, about why do I like Chinese history? Because if you study Chinese history, you find out that China has always loved, has always had an affinity for having an empire. They've always kind of been at the cutting edge. They've been ahead. They've been a target destination. The Romans love to get silk from China. It's one of the reasons the Chinese developed the Silk Road that stretches from Eastern Asia all the way to the Middle East and then from there into Europe. The Chinese were using gunpowder, were writing on paper, were printing money. Paper money comes from China. They were doing all of this years, centuries before the Europeans were. They were having advanced empires that were conquering their enemies and subduing them and creating huge amounts of land long before the Europeans ever got into those notions. And China's population has always been one of the largest in the world. And so ancient China parallels the ancient Egyptians. The Han Dynasty parallels the creation of the Chinese Empire, the Qin Dynasty, where China gets its name, and the Han Dynasty parallel the Roman Republic and Roman Empire. And so they knew about each other and had mutual respect for each other, although the Romans wanted to conquer them. So Chinese history might be the most contiguous history in all of history, because you go all the way back and it stretches forward. And China never was really colonized or conquered. It was heavily influenced and taken over in many ways by the Europeans in the 19th century, but it still had its own autonomy as a country, and that stretches back 2,000 years before the birth of Christ, for instance. So that's one of the reasons I love Chinese history. But if you mention a country, I can tell you exactly why I love its history. The myth and legend? What do you mean the myth and legend? I mean, there's a lot in Chinese history that's mythical. There's a lot in European history that's mythical that I really love. Thank you. I really appreciate that, and welcome. I'm glad to have you here. Yes, Jesus wasn't Chinese. I know that. I'm saying before the birth of Christ because that's how people usually use BC, Common Era, stuff like that. You mean the Mauryan Empire? That's maybe what we call in the West. Mauryan, Mauryan. That's the first Indian empire when India is kind of assembled into a country, and it controls about half of modern India. And that is, again, parallel to Alexander the Great and the Roman Republic and stuff like that. So, Genghis, like Genghis Khan, which is where I started off this live stream? No. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you for all your support, and make sure to like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow. You guys, yeah, no, he was not. He was Mongolian, yes. And that's where we started, and that's where we're ending. We're ending in one loop back to the Mongols. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and a great week ahead. And I will see you back here 6 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. And of course, Sundays at 4. Take care and have a great week now. Thanks for a great discussion. Bye-bye, everyone.